Ballpark Nation presents. Welcome to Go Astros, your look at the two-time World Series champions from three guys who have been here since Art Howe had hair.
Is it just me, or does it feel less like a question in the short version? For some, I mean, it's the same sound. It just feels less Art Howe. Anyway, we are back here. We are awake. Unlike the Astros offense yesterday, Andy Tom Cheston is with us. Brian Arbor is with us. Gentlemen,
awake. Unlike the Astros offense.
we are somebody's sound is on, so we need to kill your sound of the show. Weirdly enough, yeah, I could hear myself. I sound handsome. Yeah, guys. No other choice but to jump into it. The bright side is the Astros are the exact same distance in the AL West today as they were Friday morning when they started. Brian, just overall, this series, what did you think?
It's Passover for the Jewish people, and the first thing I learned about Judaism is Sandy Koufax, and the second thing I learned from my fraternity brothers in high school is that Manischewitz wine is terrible and awful and worth mocking, and I'm going to drink it all tonight.
Okay, all right. Well, there you go. I love that we're bringing a little religion into this too. Although now I guess we might have lost some of our audience for being talking about Judaism positively, but oh well. Andy.
What? I enjoyed the movies that I went to this weekend.
I did too, actually.
I can say that. It's disappointing. Sunday was understandable when you're scrambling for a starter. So pitching being what it is, I thought Hunter Brown kind of acquitted himself as well as you could have expected, moving him up a day in the rotation. Bullpen gave up another 3 runs after that. The offense was non-existent. And it's kind of, as the season has gone, there's something every game that's preventing you from winning, and it's something slightly different every game.
Well, let's dive into it then. Brian referred last episode to the emotional hole versus the real hole, and the emotional hole got deeper when Ryan Pressly blew the save after everybody was complaining that he wasn't the closer anymore. I do think part of the reason why the Hader signing was done is that there were some indications that Pressly was losing his effectiveness, even going back to last year. But Andy, Montero threw great, and then Abreu got himself into some trouble, but got out of it. At that point, were you thinking to yourself, all right, game's over? Or were you thinking like I was, man, I wish these were 8 innings?
No, 100%. I assume, and there's no data that supports this whatsoever. It's just purely anecdotal. So, Brian, you can just put your earmuffs on. Ryan Pressly, to me, always pitches better when he's in a save situation than when he's not in a save situation. That is what I have observed over time. Now, that is a statement that is based on nothing than what I've watched. I'm sure there's data that says, nope, he's the same guy no matter when he goes in. However, that's not what it feels like. And so I assumed you're giving him the 9th inning. He's had a day off. He's going to pitch well, and all is going to be right with the world, and we're going to end up winning a series for the second time this season, which is not something I was expecting to say. Instead, I went to the movies. Brian Abreu got out of trouble. Ryan Pressly blew up. And then as you would predict, if you've watched the Astros since COVID, we lost a game in extra innings. I believe we are the worst team in extra innings since the new rules have been instated. So it was a disappointing weekend on top of a disappointing season so far.
Yeah, I went to the movies too. I went to see the new Ungentlemanly Warfare movie. I went to see Abigail, which was fun. And then I went to see Immaculate Friday night. So I had a whole weekend at the movies. It was a lot of fun. Brian, talk to me a little bit about just the emotional hole of that last inning in particular.
Yeah, I mean, the Astros are 0-6 now in 1-run games, which are essentially supposed to be sort of coin flips. So you should have 3 more wins right there. That your 0-6 is at some level the same odds of throwing heads 6 times in a row. So it shouldn't happen that way. But of course, we don't sort of experience these like it's just like a coin flip. We experience them. That's I said emotional hole last week, right? That we all have this dreadful feeling, right? That if the game is close, the Astros are going to find a way to lose it. And that the bullpen is going to be good in the games when it doesn't need to be, and then bad in the games when it does, which is kind of what the history of this season has been. Over the long run, Presley, Abreu, and Hader won't be this bad. But over the short run, they've been as big a problem as any compared to expectations with this team, and that only makes the emotional hole bigger.
One of the things that I think we have to realize as a fan base is that there are problems that the front office can fix, and then there are problems that if they continue to be problems, they're going to be problems and the Astros are going to lose. And the back of the end of the bullpen is one of those. If Bregman does not start hitting, which we all know he will, but if he doesn't, you're not going to fix that problem. One problem you can potentially fix, though, is at first base. And it seems like you don't see the sort of schizophrenia of baseball fandom more than when it comes to discussing the Astros first base problems, because people that want Abreu out for Singleton, then they want Singleton out for Abreu. I will say this. And I got into I will admit it, a stupid Twitter discussion with somebody that I fell down in the rabbit hole of things because of, I don't know, both of us wanting to split hairs, but I don't like to just blame people for miscommunications. I obviously own my own as well. But Abreu has now affected several games with his glove. At some point, Brian, do we need to recognize that maybe we're not going to get offensive solutions at first base, and at least we can find somebody who might be able to play a little bit of defense at the position? Because I believe he has 3 errors on the year and some that should have been that have led to what were winning runs.
Yeah, and several sort of dropped at first base, which probably don't count as errors, but which have been a problem. I mean, we're getting nothing from first base, and that's been true so far with both Abreu and Singleton. With Abreu, it's a bigger deal, of course, because A, he's the starter, and B, he's a highly paid player, and that's part of the problem with Abreu. I talked about this on the short hop I did on Thursday. The problem with getting rid of Abreu is you have to ask the general manager who signed him to swallow a lot of money and his pride. To do that, I don't know what the internal discussions are. I was surprised that Abreu, after he got pinch hit for in the Wednesday game against the Braves in the 8th inning, got 2 starts, because it seemed to me a signal that it was getting untenable. At the same time, John Singleton hasn't started well. So, the options for Joe Espada or Small, you could certainly play. Dubon's played a little bit there in his career, and Caratini has played some there, so you could put those guys over there. I guess Yiner's played there as well. So, those are your sort of alternative options, but then you're wasting roster spots, and he's chosen not to do that so far. But at some level, they got to do something, and the front office may have to do something, and that includes potentially Joey Loperfido, or maybe spending money to get, Jared Walsh didn't do great with the Rangers, but he was DFA'd by them this week when Nathaniel Lowe came back. He's a possibility. Brandon Belt is a free agent out there, UT guy. So, you could have a nice story there. It would cost some money, and I assume they're already over budget. So we'll see what they can convince Jim Crane to do.
Yeah, Andy, I mean, do you agree with the premise, though, that at some point it's one thing if it's an offensive hole, it cannot be a defensive liability as well, right? Like, you win the game Saturday if he catches the pop-up in foul territory.
Yeah, and at this point, based on who is on the current roster, I'd rather see Dubon or realistically Singleton playing the bulk of the time at first base. Singleton at least is giving competitive at-bats. He just never has results, which is a whole different conversation. But he looks at least competent at first base. Jose Abreu's had as many errors as some first basemen have in an entire year in the first 22 games of the season. That's not great, and it's not you can excuse all kinds of things, but there's just some simple things. He doesn't square up his shoulders on ground balls, and so things hit him in the chest, and he's not able to field them, and they ricochet off. He's missing scoops that I don't care if the throw was a little bit off from Altuve. A competent first baseman makes that play. I also want to add that as much as I love Yuli Gurriel, he is also not an answer. Yeah, you could probably get him out of the Braves organization pretty easily, but he did not do appreciably better than Jose Abreu did last year, and he's not getting any younger. That's a name that's come up. Somebody else just mentioned Joey Loperfido. Somebody would be Brian. He's in the middle of a 2 for 23 streak at AAA with 9 strikeouts. So he went really hot and he's gone really cold. And, it's over 6 games, but he might not be the savior that Twitter and Astros Twitter wants him to be, as is often the case with a AAA guy.
Remember when Singleton was the savior last August?
Exactly.
Well, we never thought he was the – you're right.
Yes, but
at some point your career numbers are what your career numbers are. Trey Cabbage is also doing well in AAA for that matter. You don't hear a whole bunch about him, but he can play a competent first base. There are options. I tend to think they have to go outside the organization. It is baffling to me that the Astros have not been able to develop a first baseman since – I can't come up with a guy. Chris Carter?
Yeah, you raise it. I mean, it's a good point, and it's why I was saying that there's got to be at least a guy in this system. Maybe he can't hit, but at least can play some defense. Because you're right, there were some scoops that were missed.
Yeah, we're getting neither right now.
Yeah, we're getting 0 right now, and again, I know I got into the split hairs argument about really the effect of Abreu's not catching the pop-up, but the fact is that he catches the pop-up. I believe a sacrifice fly is how they scored their next run, which would have been 3rd out of the inning.
And it's also effective pitching, right? So every time you make an error, you're asking your pitcher on the mound to pitch more pitches. And that's not necessarily a place we've wanted the Astros to be this year. We would like as few pitches as possible to be thrown, because some of them have gone a really, really far way.
Yes. But, okay, so bright side, what kind of solace do you take, Andy, from only being 5 games back? And if the team on the spreadsheet, if the back of the baseball card for everybody else does end up playing to that potential, I mean, what is your confidence level in this team finishing where you thought they would finish at the end of the year?
I mean, confidence levels out the window, and it's interesting. Brian talked about the emotional hole for a couple of weeks now, and I don't ever get to do this. So the number 1 ranked baseball team in the country in college baseball, it's the Texas A&M Fighting Aggies, and when you watch them right now, they'll get in holes. They'll get in holes like they did on Saturday in the second game, and they're down 5-0 in the second inning, and you can watch them and know the game's not over. I don't get that from the Astros this year. I assume if we give up a couple runs, we're not going to score, or we're not going to hold them to just those couple of runs. And so it feels like we're looking for bad things to happen. My Aggies aren't doing that right now, and I'm really, really happy about it. Because, again, they've only lost 5 games this year, and they find ways to win. This Astros team's not finding ways to win. To answer your question, though, we're very lucky that the AL West seems to be a bag of ass. Nobody's playing appreciably well right now. The Mariners and Rangers will eventually figure this out. I hope to add the Astros to that list. The A's are bad, but we're worse than them right now. The Angels will be Mike Trout and a bunch of nothing at the end of the year. But I couldn't tell you what's going to happen. I don't know what this team is going to look like in 60 days, much less at the end of September, because everything they have done so far, in admittedly a very small sample size, has been so far beyond what we're used to seeing, with largely the same cast of characters, that it's baffling.
Yeah, the Astros have shown 4 major problems in the beginning of the season. Can't hit with runners in scoring position, lose close games, bad bullpen, starting pitching is a mess. We've got a better rotation on the IL than we do on the mound. 3 of those, my solution to that is just play long enough and things will even out. Now, how long is long? This is where, I don't know that necessarily it'll all even out over the next 140 games or whatever we have left in the season, but it should even out. Obviously, to Andy's point, right? the emotional hole and the emotional feeling is they're going to find a way to lose because, well, they've done that every single one-run game this season. The vaunted back of the bullpen has not pitched like they're a vaunted back of the bullpen. So these are compounding themselves and compounding themselves emotionally. Obviously, sort of the biggest sort of structural issue with the team right now is that they are going to run out their first, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th best starting pitchers right now, or maybe their second. But they've got a better rotation on the IL. It looked like things were kind of getting a little sort of better on Friday when Verlander came back and mostly looked like Justin Verlander. And we went back to having 5 pitchers on the IL when Javier had to go on the IL yesterday. So that's the bigger issue. And, some of that is we don't know why Christian Javier just suddenly, has over the last several days had a stiff neck. Pitchers break, and they probably should have planned a little better for that. On the other hand, hey, when you've got 5 pitchers on the IL, there's just only so much you can do about that. And let's just hope Spencer Arrighetti is, able to, work some things out on the mound. He's shown some promise and things get better. That's to me, the biggest sort of long-term issue with this team is, can they get good enough starting pitching to compete throughout the season? And that's the biggest question.
Yeah, I really foresaw a 6-2 road trip. Obviously that doesn't look
still in play.
I mean, it's still in play and
mathematically possible.
Clearly I would take 5-3 at this point. At least with the way the days off are structured, you don't have to go to the back end of your rotation as much. You can move things around and keep Verlander on regular rest and actually see him more. Hopefully that is what happens. A couple of things that are sort of discussions I want to have about the kind of background of the Astros. And right now, one of the arguments is Crane should have kept the team of Dusty and Click. Now, how is it that we're forgetting the fact that those two pretty much weren't going to be able to work together? And I think a big part of the reason why Click was gone in 23 is that Crane chose Dusty over Click. Brian, I know you've had kind of your fingers on the pulse of the whole thing. I mean, where does that all fall for you?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, Crane chose Dusty over Click, and he didn't have to make that choice. That's a choice he made. But, notably, right, Dusty recommended that Crane veto the Jose Urquidy for Wilson Contreras trade that the front office made. And again, one of the assistant general managers who got fired, kind of the scuttlebutt is he didn't think Crane should have overruled the front office, and that was well known. And so that's obviously some bitter feelings there, I think, sort of both ways. And of course, what we saw last year, right, was Dusty kind of empowered to make his own decisions, not in concert with the front office, which is a very unusual in modern baseball. Mm-hmm. It feels Whitey Herzog passed away last week. And I mean, he's sort of a manager from a bygone era of when the manager had his own personality on the team, not only from a psychological standpoint, from a playing style standpoint. And we don't see that anymore. It's front offices make the decisions, managers execute it. We didn't see that last year in Houston. And frankly, we didn't see some of that, Dusty and Click, they weren't hired, Click didn't hire Dusty, which is the usual way these things work. They hired the manager first and then the general manager back in 2000. So could they work together? I mean, they worked together well enough to win a World Series. And part of this, hey, the team should stick together is, well, it was good enough to win a World Series. Whatever tension there was, it wasn't enough to resolve that. On the other hand, whatever tension there was, it was enough to say to Jim Crane, I'm going to give a lowball offer and essentially run off a World Series winning GM.
Andy, how do you see that how that played out?
I mean, pretty much what Brian described. I think the issue is more Click and Crane than Click and Dusty, because to Brian's point, there's a whole history of GMs and managers who don't necessarily get along for long periods of time, and they can still manage to win games and be competent. I think Click's personality and Click's desire to do things a certain way did not jive with the way Jim Crane wanted to do things. And right, wrong, or indifferent, and we can debate this till the cows come home, Jim Crane signs the checks, and so he ultimately gets to make that decision.
Sure.
So could you have found a way to keep it together? Yeah, sure. If he wanted to, he could have. And at some point, you got to know that Dusty was going to retire anyway, so maybe Click just had to keep biting his tongue for another year or two. But at the end of the day, the problems that the Astros are facing right now have nothing to do with who's in the manager's box and not necessarily who's in the GM box. You've got a bad contract for Jose Abreu that Crane and, by all accounts, Jeff Bagwell somehow got signed.
That I will provide the caveat to, as we do on this show all the time. There was a bidding war. That's why he got the third year. No, I'm not saying anything, but I'm saying a lot of people are like, they never should have signed him, and everybody was excited about it when it happened. And I'm just trying to, as you bring these points up, prevent people from commenting, never should have signed him.
But everybody was excited that Joe Espada was named manager this year too.
Yeah.
There is not a person who was upset that we signed Josh Hader. But when you start 7-22 or whatever we are, 7-16, I'm not projecting those losses yet.
No.
You get to second guess, right? You get to say, well, why didn't we sign three middle relief guys and keep Presley and Abreu in? And you don't know that Presley wouldn't be having the exact same problems that he's having right now. So they've made moves. They've tried to make moves, and they haven't worked yet. They might not work at all. There is a world where we have to do something about Jose Abreu, whether it's talking him into retiring or just biting the extra, $40 million left that we owe him, or $30 million, somewhere in that neighborhood. But again, that's going to be on Jim Crane ultimately. Dana Brown doesn't necessarily own that signing because he wasn't employed by the Astros, although he's getting a lot of pushback for it. But, maybe looking at why Josh Hader's there, or looking why we don't have a better backup plan than John Singleton, that's something that was in Dana Brown's control. And that's something that wouldn't have been on Jim Crane's radar because it wouldn't have mattered to him who your backup first baseman was. As it is, we keep a guy on the roster because he's out of options. We've got two of those guys right now. And that's not really how you build a championship baseball team. We don't want to lose Brandon Bielak. Really? Is it because you're going to need a 15th starter this year?
Well, we might. So,
yeah.
Okay, but after that start happens, can we just start hiring guys for talent and keeping them on the roster because they're good? There's a lot of revisionist history going on right now. And Click and Dusty's relationship was interesting, and it was fun drama, and some people certainly made their name on reporting on it. But at the end of the day, it has nothing to do, or very little to do, with what's going on with the 2024 Astros.
Okay, so Andy, we'll start with you on this then. I believe people are prematurely starting to blame Espada for what's going on. Take it like a macro view from this. At what point can we start saying, okay, this might be a manager problem, or is this purely going to be a talent deficiency issue, particularly when you have 17,000 starters on the IL?
Well, I'll answer that by saying this, and this is not a pro Dusty Baker take by any means, because he certainly had his flaws. But Dusty Baker's history prior to coming to the Astros is that he won a lot of regular season games, couldn't quite get over the hump in the playoffs. And that's what you needed when the Astros were coming off what happened in January of 2020, right before COVID, was somebody who was going to continue to allow your team to win a lot of games. And he did that. That he fulfilled his role. He got his World Series. All that's great. Joe Espada, everybody to a man thought he was the right person for the job. You're seeing some second guessing and revisionist history now about, well, other teams interviewed him and didn't hire him, so that should have been a red flag. But there was nobody that was questioning that hire when it was finally made. As a matter of fact, most of us were sitting around going, why don't they just hire the guy already and stop flirting with Brad Ausmus or whoever they were flirting with at that point. The fact is, though, that if the Astros keep winning at a 30% clip, Joe Espada is going to get fired. And it might not be in May. It shouldn't be in May. It might not be the All-Star break, and it probably shouldn't be. But if they're not playing better by then, appreciably better, and not in some sort of playoff conversation, because again, they only need to be the 6th best team in the American League to make the playoffs, which they're not right now, then there's some questions. You can chalk some of this up to injury. Again, to Brian's point, your best rotation possible is on the IL, and you're not getting some of them back for a while. So he's been dealt kind of a bad hand, and he is trying things. He has adjusted the order to some extent. He's moved Bregman around. He's moved Tucker around. He smartly, in my opinion, left Pena where he's confident to hit right now, and Pena's doing well. But there's only a limited number of things you can try when you've got a bench that's not that great, and you've got this giant hole at first base that sucks up a lot of your payroll. But as part of taking this job as a manager of a Major League Baseball team too, sometimes teams don't win, and sometimes good managers get fired. I'm not there yet on Espada, but I think it's a legitimate conversation if things haven't turned around by, August. Is he the guy for the job, or are we looking for another manager?
Brian?
Yeah, I mean, so, they're playing poorly under Joe Espada. The question is, are they playing poorly because of Joe Espada? And that's really hard for us to answer because, again, mostly the job of the manager is setting the tone of the clubhouse and dealing with sort of the mental side of players and getting them to sort of move forward, to avoid distractions and to focus on the most important things. Is Espada doing that? I don't know, because I don't know sort of the internal dynamics, and it asked me to play psychologist, and I'm not trained to do that. That's part of why I like numbers, is I can make you conclusions based on numbers that are really sort of definitive. I can't make conclusions on psychology. The one thing he's done poorly is he repeated the back of the baseball card comment, which is,
That's what we're renaming the show to, by the way. Back of the baseball card live.
Well, here's the thing: is they go on a 6-game winning streak this week, we'll forget about that. We will remember that as long as it's emblematic of how poorly they're playing. And it's a function of how they're doing rather than a reason for why they're doing poorly at this point. But in the end, Andy's right? If they don't win, and also it's possible at some point you just got to say, we just need to change the atmosphere in there.
Yep.
And it is the cheapest, easiest move to make in sports.
Yeah, and remember who we played in the World Series in 2022? We played the Phillies, who were off to a terrible start. They fired the manager, and they played better. Was it because the manager? I don't know. It was also partly because people were just like, I don't have to deal with Joe Girardi anymore, who's kind of, personality is sort of always there and always in your face. And, Joe Espada has a different personality, different manager named Joe. So, maybe a different formula would work, but we're a long way from sort of getting there on what that is.
The last thing I want to bring up, and I know this will become a recurring conversation, but look, I am a long-suffering Cowboys fan. Jerry Jones and Jim Crane are not the same person. I think that Jerry Jones has the ability to be much more flighty with how well the team does, because the Cowboys are still the most valuable sports franchise in America. The Astros are only as valuable as they are good, and I don't see this guy risking his finances by trying to play general manager and president of baseball operations. I do think that there were 2 signings that have been questionable that might be an albatross on this club for a little bit. The Hader signing, if he doesn't work out, and obviously the Abreu thing. But in my mind, having lived with Jerry Jones, you sir are no Jerry Jones. How scared of you, though, Andy, are you of the Jerry Jones comparisons being true?
I'm not. Jerry Jones is a unique individual, and
he likes the glory hole.
And Cowboys fans, you enjoyed Jerry Jones when you were winning in the 90s. It just hasn't worked out since then. And, good luck.
Well,
to you.
we're almost in the 90s again, but it's 100. Yeah. Okay.
It's human beings like to put things in boxes. And so, he's a rich guy and he owns a team and he's doing stuff we don't like. So he's probably the same as this other rich guy who owns a team and is way too involved in front office decisions. Is Jim Crane difficult to work for? Probably. are a lot of really successful, wealthy guys, difficult to work for, most of them. Is he meddling and probably sometimes got his fingers in things he doesn't need to have them in? Likely. That doesn't make, and Jerry Jones is a whole nother level to that. And I think the reality is, if the Astros, let's put it this way, if Jeff Bagwell hadn't shown up to Jose Abreu's press conference and answered questions from Mark Berman a few years ago, nobody would be really worried about how involved Jim Crane or Reggie Jackson or Jeff Bagwell were in the personnel decisions. But the fact is he did, and Jeff Bagwell, as Jeff Bagwell does, said a lot of things that he probably shouldn't say, and inflated his role a little bit in the signing of guys other than, hey, it's a good organization, come play for us. It's not like he was negotiating contract terms at that point. That has cast a pallor, especially when you were used to Jeff Lunau and Jane Click and the way they operated. So is Crane at fault? Is Crane difficult? Is Crane bullheaded? Probably. And, okay, it's not something you're going to change. Is it, again, the reason the Astros have only won 7 games so far this year? Not entirely, and I don't think even majorly. The reason we've only won 7 games is because you have an offense that is underperforming with runners in scoring position. You don't have starting pitching that's reliable, and your bullpen is a crater fire right now. So I'm not buying the comparison.
Brian, one of the things I want you to think about when you answer the question too is how much of Jim Crane's hands-on all of a sudden is a reaction to the last time he let somebody completely run the program, they got busted for cheating and lost money and draft picks. Like, how much of that do you think factors into if Jim Crane is getting more hands-on? Is that why?
It's hard to say because, so during the Lunau years, and Andy sort of referred to this, Lunau was the dominant and almost unanimous force, at least publicly, about what was going on in the press, in the front office. During the Click years, it still seemed, the first time we really sort of saw that, Crane had a big influence on sort of day-to-day decision-making was the veto of the Contreras trade and Contreras for Urquidy trade, which we didn't learn about until the day after the World Series victory. But it does sort of mark this point here where ever since then, Jim Crane, obviously Jim Crane set a budget, and that was a key thing, particularly into the Click years where they were trying to be real close to the salary cap. But Jim Crane has had a bigger influence, and the moves that have happened since, even after Dana Brown has come in, have had lots of Jim Crane's fingerprints on it, including, hey, getting our old friend Justin Verlander back, my golfing buddy, and, signing the most expensive reliever, which again is necessary for the owner to approve the spending, particularly spending above the salary cap on that. So again, always going to be an important sort of ownership decision on that. And that, to me, I wrote about this at the beginning of the season. Crane seems to be the key decision maker in the front office now, and that's different than how this franchise was run in his first decade. Could that shift? Absolutely, because he's not set himself up to be Jerry Jones. He's not set himself up to be the sole decision maker, the person who's at the head of this. And again, there are clear areas where Dana Brown, the bullpen, particularly the middle relief, is Dana Brown's creation right now. And so, there's different areas where there's sort of different influence, but it again is distinctly different than what we saw during Jeff Lunau's years, where everything seemed to be from the front office.
All right, I guess we'll obviously continue to dive into this. I think now it's time for our parting shot. Go ahead.
Sorry, he also hasn't hired his son to be GM yet, so there's that.
He has not done that. That's
He's
true.
just president of business operations, and that's fine, I guess. So
yeah, as long as he can.
Well, put it this way, we haven't heard about
He's
him.
the one who's responsible for you.
But we haven't heard about him in 2 years since he got hired. So that's probably a good thing. It's rare for the business operation guys to be in the news for positive things.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, you're right, and I do think for as much as I don't agree with the knee jerk reactions of much of our fan base, I understand them. It has been tough to be an Astros fan since 2020, and so I get the knee jerk reactions to all of it. Andy, any parting shot?
Just win games. You have to go to Wrigley for 3. We're not favored in any of them, I don't believe, and I have no idea who's starting. It sounds like Fromber's coming back, so let's look forward to Fromber coming back probably next Friday. Go Stros.
And then they play in Mexico City at 7,000 feet. So let's see how many home runs they can hit in higher elevation.
All right. Well, as I'll wrap it up by saying, no matter what has happened, you are still only 5 games back. And if you believe this team is talented, and I do, they can turn this thing around. Everybody, we will see you back here next week. Look for some daily short hops from the 3 of us. Those are kind of fun to do, and it allows us to get some knee-jerk reactions that we don't have to tie ourselves to. Everybody have a great week, and go Stros.